Every night when I get into bed, I try to remember to wind the Art Deco pocket watch that sits on the bedside table. Both an antique and an heirloom, I don't need it. I use it just to use it. My mother gave it to me years ago, not as a gift from her, but as something that I could appreciate from my father, even if he was not the one giving it to me. He received it from his father as a high school graduation present, but I do not know whether he ever used it. Nor do I know how my mother came to possess it. She probably had it because my father left much of his life behind after their divorce, including my brother, sisters, and myself. The watch had a fractured crystal, which did not interfere with its operation or the ability to read the time, but which did mar its appearance. I recently decided to have the crystal repaired and the watch cleaned. I wanted to assure it continued to work, not so much for myself, but as a relic from the past, a witness, as it were, of a different time and way of life. Since then, I have tried to use it by leaving it where I would see it and thus be reminded to wind it. It sat next to my computer for a while, but even though I placed it prominently, it was just too easy for me to rely on the computer's clock or my wristwatch to remember to wind the pocket watch regularly. Since putting it by my bed, I have been better about winding it as part of the ritual of preparing for sleep. I usually wear my wristwatch through the night, but there is just something about a clock by a bedside that triggers my desire to wind it. It is almost like a muscle memory of those days not that long ago, when a bedside clock had to be wound if it were to be relied upon. Every time I do it, I remember a story someone once told me about a friend of hers who made a point every night of winding his children's watches after putting them to bed. She found that habit quite funny and compulsive. I thought it neither, but the story has stuck with me despite the suggestion that her friend's behavior was gratuitous and weird. If anything, I found his habit rather touching, a small, unspoken expression of love and concern that is all the more convincing for being centered on a trivial object, as if no action is too small for the ones who matter to us. My reaction to her story will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me or my work. For instance, after auditions for a part in one of the films I made with Mike Whately, he walked me back to my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him watching me leave, his face a mixture of affection and quiet concern that I should have a safe drive. When some time later I told Mike that was the time I felt closest to him, he described it as a real Toshiro moment. It is not just my notorious fascination with still life and the power of objects to arouse memories or to move through innate appeal. It is the general power of the small, the overlooked, the banal, the seemingly insignificant to fascinate or overwhelm even as we insist they are of little importance. Such supposedly meaningless details are like signals that unleash a flood of memory and association that engulf and sweep us away. Proust made a life's work of sharing his version of this experience, expressing something so much a part of being human that it was as if he had cast the light on a corner of a room darkened by neglect, exposing it to the sun to reveal a kaleidoscope of sparkling, vivid hues. But it is more than memory that is unleashed by the seemingly insignificant. At any given moment, time, space, thought, experience, desire, and fear can come together briefly, inexplicably, to burnish the trivial into the transcendent. In something as simple as the moving shadows of late afternoon, in which each fleeting moment is unique and precious, we can bask in the miracles of simply being alive, of bearing witness to a spectacle that will never be seen again. In fact, I never saw my father handle or wear the watch. Whatever significance it might have had for him, as a cherished memory of my grandfather, or as a way to remember a particular point in his life, or perhaps reliving an adolescent thrill at owning such a stylish, even rakish accoutrement, seems distant, abstract, and more than a little contrived and obligatory, as if I am conjuring such sentiments for him. I feel that way not just because he never admitted such feelings to me. It comes from the suspicion that if the watch had meant much to him, he would not have left it behind. But if the watch does not figure in any direct memories of my father, it does stir me to think about him generally. If his neglect of the watch reminds me of how callous to the point of cruel he could be, that recognition is almost immediately tempered by thoughts of his humor and affection, or his outsized pride at my achievements, so that I believe that if he were alive, he would smile at the thought that I should be the one to have the watch. The memories that the watch triggers are always complex, a little tortured, more likely to reflect the difficulties in dealing with my father than any kind of fond sentiment. Not that we had a rough or charged relationship. I did not know him well enough for that to be the case, beyond brief flare-ups of father-son competition and negotiation sharpened by the knowledge of the time we could not spend together, by the inevitable growing apart from growing up without him. The difficulties arose from that very distance between us, the gulf we both tried to bridge in his later years. The effort to find a common ground that, as father and son, we both felt we should share. That fumbling, awkward, often intense, always slightly guarded search, that desire to repair damage between us as best we could, was the one thing we did share. It was love of a kind, but never simple or spontaneous, never likely to inspire unconscious sparks of affectionate memory, and just as likely to break down from the assumptions we could not share, the questions for each other we did not know how to ask. Sitting on my bedside table, the antique watch offers a bit of history embroidered with family memories, steeped with an inevitably greater resonance than the other objects on the tabletop. Simply evidence of my life, they do not and cannot radiate such an aura, although they have their own limited reverberations. I may think of Jill when I look at the water bottle that I bought with her, or of Kirsten and Jonathan when I stop to think about the coaster under it that they gave me. Or I'll think of Kathy when I open the small, round, wooden box that she bought for me in Japan that I use for sleeping aids. But they are more like punctuations of memory, stopping and starting the chain of associations, incomplete, short, and limited, just enough to summon brief fragments, like shards that taken together make little sense and quickly fall back into insignificance. Insignificance, but never entire irrelevance. It takes time and reflection, but at some point the everyday turns into an archaeology of our own lives. Surrounded by reminders of what we have done, who we have known, where we have been, it is impossible to escape ourselves. We may not want to escape. We may wrap the blanket of memory around us, like a solace against adversity we can hide behind. Or we may want nothing more than to throw away and be free of that blanket suffocating us with what has been. Each time we try, however, we merely start again. like Thoreau despairing at the path he unconsciously trod from his home to Walden Pond. We are condemned to relive our lives repeatedly, no matter how strong our desire to breathe the fresh air of new experience. In following our desires, even if only the desire to forget, we inevitably return to ourselves, burdened with new memories that join and compete with the old. The things that excite those memories, the bric-a-brac, the jewelry, the letters, the clothes, the toys, the carpets, the furniture, the photos, especially the photos. Those clever, elusive liars tantalizing us with a siren's promise of a truth that always wriggles away like quicksilver at the moment we think we have grasped it. They can be discarded. The memories live on without them, hovering in the shadows, as much ghosts or demons demanding exorcism as lapidary reminders of what we have lost.